This is a presentation of Mr. Kenneth Haber, attorney at law from Boyd's, Maryland. The moderator here is Attorney Ramesh Khurana from the law office of the Khurana Law Firm, located in Gaithersburg, Maryland. On this set, Attorney Khurana questions Attorney Haber on telemedicine. Let's pay attention.
Welcome to the Capital Forum. I am Ramesh Khurana, attorney at law. I have my practice in Gaithersburg, Maryland. But in regard to immigration practice, I practice in all 50 states, including Washington, D.C. And I hold license to practice other matters in Maryland and D.C. Now today, I have a great privilege in presenting to you a very renowned and distinguished attorney who is the former Assistant U.S. Attorney and the former Senior Attorney in the Office of Inspector General. He is going to answer questions in these sessions about the telemedicine. Who doesn't want to hear about telemedicine? Before we go into Q&A session, I would like to formally welcome Mr. Haber. Welcome.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Great. I know this topic of telemedicine is very close to your heart.
I enjoy it.
You enjoy it.
I enjoy it.
Now, can you please explain to begin with, what is telemedicine? Because so many people are confused about the term even. And when you explain it, please tell us which federal agency or any other agency has defined the term medicine.
Well, it's been defined by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is, of course, big brother to all medicine. Mm-hmm. It's defined as interactive medicine at two different sites that does not include telephone, fax, or email. So what that leaves you is a visual type of communication, with voice, and I would think that licensing agencies would probably consider telemedicine as well, reading radiology across state lines. I really don't know how CMS looks at that aspect of it, but in any event, these are, your concept of telemedicine. To be true telemedicine for CMS, the doctor is supposed to be able to see you and consult with you in real time to find out what your problem is and to prescribe real medicine to deal with it. Telemedicine sort of has a black eye, if I can use that term, from the fact that there's been so many fraud and shysters involved in the dispensing of controlled substances in a very, very inappropriate fashions. And DEA has had to do a lot of regulatory changes and a lot of enforcement changes to try to get on top of that sort of thing. But there is a true telemedicine that really serves purposes. There could be specialists in different states that are able to consult and to assist. And just because somebody's in a different state doesn't mean that the patient doesn't have a real live doctor as well in the state where he's at to be consulting with the other doctor as well. Because there's legitimate needs that need to be taken care of, and there might not be a specialist in the jurisdiction where the patient's at, and might be across state lines. It could be within the same state, and the state's so big that they need to consult with somebody in a metropolitan area, but it's 1,000 miles away. That's not impossible if you're talking about Alaska, 500 miles if you're talking about Texas. So doesn't even have to be interstate. The fact of the matter is there's a legitimate basis for telemedicine, and CMS recognizes that, has requirements in order for reimbursement for payments of it. And the licensing boards are recognizing it nowadays, and they have different requirements concerning practitioners of telemedicine.
So, no, you are touching upon a very important topic when you say that licensing requirement being considered by the medical boards. So the basic question to begin with is whether the telemedicine needs a license or not.
Oh, you certainly have to be licensed in the state where you're practicing, but you might have to be licensed in the state where you're practicing, the other state.
So across the state line.
Across state lines.
If a patient sitting in Virginia is seeking medical advice through a conference, video conference, from a doctor who is in Maryland, this is across the state line. So do you think that physician will be able to give medical advice only if he is licensed in the state of Virginia as well?
It depends on what the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland say in their licensure statutes. The American Health Lawyers Association has a compendium of licensure requirements survey, and that is good as of the time it was published, because there could be changes. But the fact of the matter is that different states will have different requirements. And if you're going to be practicing telemedicine, it's important that you make sure that you're in compliance. I was down in Florida once for a medical licensing board matter, and there was a doctor that came in. He wanted to obtain licensure in Florida because he had it in like 14 different jurisdictions, and he did telemedicine, and he wanted to add Virginia to it, and he wanted to make sure he was licensed in each state that he was practicing. And
I have seen, Ken, that telemedicine is much more efficient and much cheaper. I have heard from certain patients, I don't know how far it is true, like people are sitting in Maryland and they are consulting physicians through telemedicine, and they have to hardly pay $100, and they get real-time advice through a video.
Well, you know, I would be cautious of telemedicine that comes in on the cheap, because for the doctor to be able to perform telemedicine, he needs to have to conduct, check the blood pressure, check the temperature, check the normal things that a doctor's office will do, and to be able to have the visual, and that's why they exclude just telephone. But if you have a teleconferencing where there's a visual, they'd be able to make certain observations, because it's
educated guesses, only educated guesses.
It's the practice of medicine where you see, and you want good good visual, because the fact of the person's, perspiring, you want to be able to see if the person's got different, exhibiting different, exhibiting different. So it's optimal, I would say, where if a patient happens to have a doctor or a physician assistant where they're at, but they need a specialist, and this is not necessarily the requirements, but optimal, and they need a specialist that might be up in Anchorage. Then they're doing a teleconference there with visual monitors with the doctor, and they're able to come up with a better diagnosis and better treatment for the patient who might be in some village in Alaska. The more you're in an urban setting, the less justification there is for telemedicine versus the patient actually going to the doctor's office and seeing the doctor. Now, there was a time, and I'm sure it's in some locations where, it's going on right now, that people are using telemedicine in order to fraudulently obtain controlled substances. And I'm sure you can Google up, prescription pharmacies that are telepharmacies that will have somebody who is hooked up with them that's going to write a prescription just to give some sort of coverage. But that's why DEA's come out with new regulations to try to prevent that type of situation and make it prosecutable.
Now, can tell us something about telepharmacies and internet pharmacies, and also about the concept of electronic prescriptions?
Well, telepharmacies and internet pharmacies could be totally legitimate depending upon the specifics. It's like anything else. Is it being used properly, or is it being abused? And, so there's no implication that each and every one of them are illegal in the slightest, and that's how come it takes investigators to make discernments. e-prescriptions is something that Medicare has insisted upon. And if a doctor doesn't get e-prescriptions going, then they're penalized, because they consider this part of getting everything digitalized. They want to have the patient's whole medical record, digital, and that can be transferred from one doctor's situs to another doctor's situs, and that patients can carry their history records like that, and that's just part of it.
Right. Okay. Now, what is happening with the Medicare Part D and Uniform E-Prescribing System standards? Can you please shed some light?
Well, Part D is, of course, D stands for drugs, Medicare drugs, and as we were talking about, the e-prescription is part and parcel of that. So the different Medicare insurance contractors that pay for these more and more, if not always, insist upon e-prescribing. They certainly need to get the information digitally from the pharmacy, but they probably would want to get it from, and they're going to be in due course getting it from the doctors as well in real time, because of the fact that Medicare is pushing the doctors to do e-prescribing just like they do the e-billings.
Right. Now, let us know what are some of the issues of standards of care and unprofessional conduct. That is also a very important aspect of telemedicine.
Yes. Well, standards of care, there's an issue about standards of care that goes beyond telemedicine. Is it a local standard of care, or is it a national standard of care? We're a nation that has substantial uniformity in terms of our medicine capacity, et cetera, et cetera. However, some local areas don't have all the specialists available, and therefore in rural areas they may very well go for the local standard of care and not think that their doctors have to perform up to the doctor in Manhattan. The same thing goes for the concept of telemedicine. Can they bring in these specialists and raise the standard of care in rural areas? So it's a dynamic, because of the fact now the rural medical facilities can have associations with urban area physicians who come from the universities and are prepared to give input. And as this goes on, and there's a transition, it'll be more and more a national standard of care. But at this point in time, you will find different areas where they'll have a local standard of care if there was like a malpractice case or something.
Very well explained, Ken. I'm very happy that you answered all my questions beautifully. I again thank you for coming to our studio. We have to wrap it up because time is over. I thank you very much.
I thank you.
Thank you.